Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for coming to this Sustainable Beef Vision Summit. This Beef Summit is specifically for Latin America. We recognize the importance of the Latin American beef industry to the global beef industry, and the important role that Latin America plays as a beef exporter. And we really wanted to recognize that and bring together all of these national initiatives from throughout Latin America to share their experience with each other and to prepare for next year when our global conference on sustainable beef will be held in Paraguay. I think that you're going to be able to showcase a lot here, and we're going to be able to share lessons which we can then share with the whole globe next year in Paraguay. We're really excited about the fact that we have been invited to Paraguay, and we're really excited about the fact that you have all come together here to show your commitment here in Brazil today. We're going to start with a quick video, and then I'll talk a little bit about GRSB. Josefina will explain more about the event itself, and then we'll move through the program. So let's have the video first.
We envision a world in which all aspects of the beef value chain are environmentally sound, socially responsible, and economically viable. We are the Global Roundtable for Sustainable Beef. The beef industry is tasked with supplying a growing, hungry world with a safe and nutritious food supply. With the global demand increasing every day, beef producers, marketers, and buyers will continue looking for new technology and practices that will help meet these needs while protecting our resources. The GRSB is helping to lead the way for these sustainable efforts. GRSB is the strategic platform where leading stakeholders from within the beef industry, environmental branch, retailers, and others come together to advance continuous improvement and sustainability of the global beef value chain through sharing their knowledge, leadership, science, and through multi-stakeholder engagement and collaboration. GRSB's members come from across the world and the beef supply chain to identify the way forward to a more sustainable beef supply. The GRSB uses 5 principles to define sustainable beef: natural resources, people and the community, animal health and welfare, food, and efficiency and innovation. Making beef production, processing, transportation, and merchandising more sustainable is the focus of the beef sustainability movement. Simply put, sustainable beef producers are working to do the right thing, the right way, at the right time, for the right reason.
Thanks for that. And when we say in that video, we are GRSB, I mean all of us in the room are GRSB, because many of you represent companies who are a member of one of the national roundtables. Many of you represent an organization that is in one way or another already involved with one of the national roundtables. And together, we make up the global roundtable. So this is not about us versus them, it's about us all together. So we can have the next slide. I am, by the way, just in case you don't know me, I'm Ruaraidh Petre. I'm the Executive Director of the Global Roundtable. I've been involved since we established in 2010. And for those of you from Brazil, you'll know that the Brazilian Roundtable, GTPS, was established before us in 2007. Brazil really led the charge on this sustainable beef movement, because some of the issues here became very high profile during those early years of the first decade of the 2000s. And particularly the issue of deforestation, of course, was a huge highlight, and that's why GTPS was formed. And GTPS has been doing great work, has produced the GIPS, the GIA, good practices for the beef industry here in Brazil, which is being adopted. You'll see that one of the sponsors, which is on the slide which roll past, is the Angus Association. I just heard this morning that the Angus Association is using the GIA to actually produce verified sustainable beef. So I think that's really a good sign that the GIA has been adopted and is being accepted by the beef industry here in Brazil. These are our sponsors, so I would like to thank all of them. We have all of the ones you can see on the slide there, and during the intervals or between presentations you'll have rolling slides of others. We also have participation here of the Global Agenda for Sustainable Livestock. They have supported the attendance of many of the people who are here. So that's part of the FAO's Sustainable Livestock Initiative, the Global Agenda for Sustainable Livestock. I'd like to thank them very much. I'd also like to thank UNDP for sponsoring a large number of the people who've come here as well. It's been a great success as far as I can see. We had originally hoped for maybe around about 120 people. A few weeks ago we were slightly panicking because we only had a few dozen people registered, and we were wondering, is this actually going to happen? But I'm given to understand that late registration is not the exception in Latin America, it's actually the rule. So thank you all for registering as you did, and in fact we filled the room. We couldn't have had any more delegates. And 17 countries, I think that's quite an achievement. Right, so the way we're going to do it, the format, you have the agenda. We're going to hear from the national roundtables today, and we're going to hear about some of the trends, about some of the issues that we're all facing, both here in Latin America, but also to some extent globally. I'm going to talk a little bit in a moment about what GRSB is doing for some of those issues, but we're going to hear then from all of the national roundtables here in Latin America, how they are addressing them. And then tomorrow we're going to talk a little bit more about the jurisdictional approach, COP24, which is in Chile this year, and some other things. And then on Friday there's a field trip, which is oversubscribed. So I'm sorry to those of you who didn't manage to get onto that, but yeah, it was a limited amount of space. Right, I don't need that. Right. Sustainability, as you'll all be familiar with this, I think everybody in this room has been involved in this world for quite some time already. When we talk about sustainability, we're not talking about one thing that you do. We're talking about the three pillars, so that's economic, social, and environmental, of course. And the way that we in GRSB have defined it, and the way that the other national roundtables have adopted the sustainability approach, builds on those three pillars. If you miss out any of those, then you're not talking about sustainability, you're talking about one of the aspects of it. We further define it with 5 principles and a number of criteria under those. So the important ones are, of course, natural resources, animal health and welfare, people and the community, food, which is essentially about food safety, though there's certainly elements of food security in there as well. Efficiency and innovation, which is one, it's more of a catch-all. Efficiency and innovation talks about the need to improve the way we do things so that we're actually producing more with less. And we have said since the beginning that this is a process of continuous improvement. It's not a sort of line that you can reach. You can't just go from one day not being sustainable to the next day, yes, I'm sustainable, and never have to change again. It's a continuous process. And that recognizes that there are some countries or some producers or some companies who still have further to go than others, but we all need to be working to improve. And then on the efficiency and innovation one as well, we also recognize that there are technologies which are very new and which we may not yet recognize the full potential of. We may not fully then have had time to adopt them, and we should leave the door open for new technology. So we are not going to, in principle, oppose new technologies. We hear in the more consumer space, if you like, hear people talking about technologies which should be rejected because for whatever reason people believe that they're not safe. Our approach is a little bit more technology neutral. We believe that technology can help us, and we should be open-minded about how we use it. And when there's good evidence that it is actually going to improve the sustainability of the industry, we should embrace it. So our membership is spread throughout now 6 different constituencies. We have producers. We have quite a lot of producer organizations around the world who are members of GRSB. Quite large ones as well. So the NCBA, the National Cattlemen's Beef Association in the United States, represents all of the state cattlemen's beef associations. So within that, you've got 52 organizations. We have the Cattlemen's Beef Board, we have the Canadian Cattlemen's Association, we have the Cattle Council of Australia, Beef and Lamb New Zealand, and we have, of course, producers from throughout Latin America involved in all of the national initiatives here in Latin America. And I think it's really crucial to have producers central to this, because a lot of what we're talking about is going to make demands, or it's going to at least request producers to provide us with evidence and information. And producers have to agree that that is something that is valuable to them, that this initiative is going to work for them, particularly on that economic pillar, as well as something that's going to make demands upon them. So if we are asking producers to adapt the things they do, that change their practices, adopt the guia here in Brazil, then we should also recognize that they need to have a decision-making role within this, and not just a marginal one, a central decision-making role. We've really seen that in the countries where producers are actually driving it, we have the most rapid progress. The others, we have, of course, the processes, an incredibly important part of the chain, and in a very concentrated part of the chain. So around the world, you really have a handful of very big processes these days. And here in Brazil, that's very graphically illustrated. I think you have 4 big processes here in Brazil. In the United States, it's also 4 or 5. In Australia, there are 2 big ones. So, I mean, maybe worldwide you can talk about 15 very large beef processors. And I think here in Latin America, it's the most extreme, because one company, Minerva, and correct me if I've got this figure wrong, but I understand that in terms of the exports from the whole of Latin America, beef exports from Latin America, Minerva controls 30% of those exports. That is an enormously concentrated industry, and therefore they're an extremely important participant in this kind of initiative. Then we have retailers, of course. They are the contact point with the consumer. We hear more and more in wealthy countries from the consumer about what the beef industry, what they expect the beef industry to do, their expectations of sustainability, their belief in the shared values, the values that we need to share to be able to continue to provide them with a product. So retailers are also a very important part, and that's why we thank McDonald's for being the sponsor and the host of this event here. And then we have civil society. They're the people who have a lot of understanding around some of the issues. They have a lot of understanding, of course, in the environmental issues. Solidaridad is also here representing a social angle of working with commodity industry. And then the 5th one is the roundtable. So the national roundtables, that's all of the people in this room, essentially. And we do have a 6th one. This graph was made before we actually admitted that 6th one. We have allied industry initiatives. So we believe it's very important also to work, for example, with the feed industry. So the Roundtable on Responsible Soy, for example. There are also responsible feed initiatives in North America. We have the Roundtable for Responsible Leather. They're all very important parts of this. And then we have the input suppliers, people like the pharmaceutical companies, the financiers, etc. Right, there's a brief timeline. I probably need to speed up a little bit, but as I said at the beginning, GTPS was the first, and you have led the way in this in many ways. You've been followed by the Global Roundtable in 2010. We had our first meeting, and then in 2012 we were actually established as a legal entity. That was rapidly followed by the formation of the Canadian Roundtable, the United States Roundtable. We had the various here in Latin America. Colombia, I think, was next. Paraguay, Argentina, Mexico, which is sort of in establishment but not really formally fully established yet. And then we have this Australian Beef Sustainability Framework. Some politics in Australia meant that they couldn't call it a roundtable, but essentially it's following very much the same process as what we do and what you all do. And New Zealand is currently forming a roundtable this year. China also launched an initiative for both for the import of beef, but also for and meat in general, I should say, in China, and also for production within China. China is an enormous market all on its own, and if we could influence the sustainability of meat consumption in China, we would already have made a huge impact globally. So that's a map of the initiatives. We also have Southern Africa, sorry I didn't mention that, and Europe. Southern Africa is a number of countries. There are 8 countries involved in that, and Europe also has several countries. And the challenge they have is that they are trying to coordinate between countries as well as within each of those individual countries. The issues that we're facing around the world are different. And that is why we decided to go for this multi-layered approach in the first place. The beef industry is tremendously different from place to place. We have different production systems, we have different environmental factors, we have different social factors, and we have different legislation. So we knew at the beginning this was not going to be possible to have one round table that fitted the whole world's beef. So we very deliberately went for this more complicated, fragmented approach, but I hope you'll agree that it does in the end work better for the producers on the ground. You need to have something that fits your national system. Okay, this is just a percentage of the world beef. So as you can see, Brazil is a huge chunk of that in terms of the beef produced in the world. The United States just pipping Brazil to the post. We don't have India on there. Of course, if we included India on that, they are one of the biggest beef exporters in the world, but they're not actually one of the biggest beef producers in the world because they don't consume really anything in India. And what they are producing is from the dairy industry. So you could talk about it as a byproduct, but a very important part of the world's beef supply, in spite of the fact that it is a byproduct. So, yeah, if we look at this is material from FAO, and you'll see that Asia and Africa do actually represent a huge proportion of the world's livestock. And if we had the specific figures for beef broken out, I'm not sure if we do, no we don't. But if you look at cattle numbers around the world and you include buffalo in that, Asia and Africa actually have 60% of the world's herd. Quite interesting because they're not figuring on the biggest producers in terms of beef, are they? And that does tell us something about Asia and Africa. They're more geared towards milk production, but they're just not producing as much per animal. And that there is an efficiency lesson in there. Sorry, I should have just talked about this for a minute and what we're doing this year. So the objectives of our summit here are exchanging our experience between the roundtables. I think all of us have got a lot to learn from GTPS, but also from each other within the region. We want to talk about GRSB's own development. So I think one of the important things that has happened this year, and this is probably the only thing I'll dwell on just now because of time, is we had a meeting in Chicago in May on our strategic plan. We needed to update that. We actually formulated it only a few years ago, but there's been rapid progress on some of the things that we've done and rapid evolution of the roundtable network. And we just came to the conclusion it was time to take the next step. And perhaps the most important of our goals in the coming 5 to 10 years are that we are actually going to establish global goals on a number of our principal areas. So that was the decision that the board of GRSB, including many of the people who are in this room now, were there in Chicago and we discussed this. So we're going to set these goals and we're going to base those on the materiality analysis coming out of each of your countries. So this is not going to be something that is done from on high. This is actually coming out of the national work that you're doing. And we're going to need strong national and regional input to make those goals realistic and achievable, but also ambitious. We don't want to just sit back and say, okay, we're going to set these so low that everybody can achieve. We want these to be ambitious. And looking at the materiality analysis as we have done, one of the things that came out from every single region was a climate goal. We need to set a climate goal. Now, at the end of this year, as you know, COP will be held in Chile. That is the Global Climate Summit. Last year was in Poland, where I presented on the value of grazing systems for carbon sequestration. This year, we want to actually make an announcement about the setting of a global goal for the beef industry. Now, a number of our member countries have already done that. So Australia and New Zealand have both set a target for the livestock industries in those countries to become carbon neutral. New Zealand by 2050, Australia already by 2030. So they are ambitious goals. And we're not necessarily saying that we want that to be the global goal, but that is a measure of the ambition that exists within the livestock industry. And I think we should certainly be ambitious, but recognizing that not all regions are going to be able to work as fast as others. I mean, Australia and New Zealand have a significant issue that they've already reduced their sheep numbers massively. So Australia's reduced their sheep numbers by 110 million, New Zealand by about 45 million. That obviously has an impact on their emissions in those two countries. So I'm not saying that we're all going to go for that carbon or that climate neutral goal by 2050, but we should certainly be setting ourselves a climate goal. The rest of the goals, I can't tell you what they are because we have not taken that formal decision, and you will all be part of taking that decision. But the sorts of areas that we should be looking at are going to be biodiversity. I know that's a major issue for most of you in the national roundtables here in Latin America. We should be looking at animal welfare because that is one where the consumer has major concerns. We should probably be looking at antimicrobial stewardship. We released a statement last year on antimicrobial stewardship. It's something that the global agenda is working on as well as a priority focus area. And it's something that the livestock industry definitely has a major role to play on. So we should be looking at antimicrobial stewardship. The rest, I'm not going to guess exactly what they are. I think there should probably be a social goal in there as well. We need to be sure that the livestock industry is working for our producers and for our communities. For the rest, our sustainability, strategic plan is going to be working on an accountability framework. Obviously, if you set goals, you need to also set an accountability framework to report on those goals. We're going to be talking about partnerships to enable us to meet them. One of the important partnerships is with all of you in this room, the Global Agenda, UNDP, all of the national roundtables. All of these people can help us deliver on those goals. So we want stronger partnerships. We want to work closer with you all. We're going to talk about communications. Our fourth strategic area to work on this year and in the coming 5 to 10 years is communications. There is a lot of communication and miscommunication about the beef industry and its role in sustainability. We need to be better at that. And then the fifth one is supporting the roundtable network. And that is part of what this event is about and part of what events we're going to arrange in the coming years are going to be, to make sure that we can be all getting the best out of our roundtables that exist. So I'm sorry, I probably overshot my time there, and I'll now introduce Josefina, who's the Regional Director for Latin America. Thank you very much.